I was born in Borsley, where I lived. It was different then than what it is now. There's all old buildings there was then. The streets was rough compared they are today. I used to go to Oak Street School, that's just down the road, and I had a very good childhood. But the war did finish it and upset everybody, and then bombing started and it was all changed, and then everybody changed. The world started to change all round. The main centre of the town is a lot different then than what it is today. That they used to have markets in the street and that, but now it's all closed in. Well, the bull ring you could not get up and down the street for traffic, and that is a good thing today, that you can walk around the town and you haven't got to be feared of traffic. But before then, you just couldn't move in the town. There was buses here and buses there, and it's a wonder there was more accidents than there was. But today, it is quite nice to go around the town with under the subways. It's really nice to walk around the town.
Letting the new year in. Well, now, that goes straight back to the days of the witches. It's centuries old. And it was always the custom that a dark man let the new year in. If a woman let it in, it was the worstest of bad luck. And so at about 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, all the men used to get together and get into groups and then go and sing outside the door. And they sung a song that goes back to Saxon days. It went somehow like this. Here we come a-wazzling amongst the leaves so green. Here we come a-wazzling so far to be seen. God send you happy, God send you happy, may God send you happy and a joyful new year. After that lot, the missus used to open the door and the dark-headed and used to nip in, you know, out through the back up the entry, then in again with his mates, and they all had a drop of summit. And they'd move on to the next door and carry on the same. Of course, about 5 o'clock in the morning, they don't know where they was or who they was. So they used to knock at the first door they come to. And they'd shout up to the missus when they shoved the head through the bedroom window, "Come downstairs, will you, missus, and pick Johan out of wee?" Now, you remember old Charlie on the chase? Well, he was telling me about old Geordie. And one New Year's morning, Geordie's missus shoved her head through the window and I looked down at him. And I says, "Mine eye amongst you lot." So, of course, they all moved on, Geordie with them. And when the women had picked their own out, there was only old Geordie left. So he sat on a doorstep. When old Charlie was going to work at about 6:30 in the morning, he seen Geordie, so he says, "What's up with you, Geordie?" And Geordie says, "Of course, the our house anyway, Charlie." Charlie says, "Of course you go. I'm sitting on your doorstep with your back to it." Then he rode up, he shouted upstairs to Mrs. Geordie, "I should come and fetch your Geordie in, missus, he's lost." He says, "Oh, he's all right, he'll find himself as soon as it's too late to go to work. I've never known him to know where he was going till he was coming back, then he'll swear blind half the time it wasn't him as went."
When I was a boy, we used to go for picnics onto West Wickham Hill, and we had to walk, of course, about 5 miles across the common and through the woods. And when we got there was always a toboggan to ride. We used to ride down the hill on this toboggan and start at the top and slide it down, and when, if you got a good run, you could go right down to the bottom of the hill or even farther into the road. But there was no danger there because there was nothing on the road. And then, of course, you've got the job of pulling it all the way back up the hill. Well, that wasn't so good, but still, it was good fun. We used to get toboggan for an hour for 2pence, or a penny, I forget which it was. Very little, and it was jolly good fun, really.
I'm a Methodist local preacher, and I've been spending a Sunday down on a Cornish farm. It was dark, but the sky was starlit when the farmer's daughter and I set out to go to the village chapel where I was to conduct the evening service. She suggested taking a shortcut by going through a path field. And so we climbed over a stile into the big field and started going through it when suddenly a mist came on and we became lost. We went round and round that field and just couldn't find the stile over which to go to get into the road leading to the chapel. My guide, who was a middle-aged woman, had been through that field hundreds of times and knew it like the back of her hand, but she was as helpless as I was. Then at last she tumbled to it. "I know what 'tis," she said. "We're being pixie-led." She told me of other people who'd been pixie-led in that same field, and of horses left in the field overnight being found next morning covered with sweat, having been chased hither and thither by the pixies. "Well," I said, "what have we got to do about it?" "There's only one thing to do," she said. "We must turn our pockets inside out." I turned all my pockets inside out, and she did the same, or said she did. And sure enough, believe it or not, we found the stile in no time. We were late in getting to the chapel. The congregation had given us up for lost, and were about to go home. I shall never forget that night in that field when I was pixie-led.
O Lord, you knows as there be all sorts of languages and modes of speech. So I reckon you won't take it amiss if I talks to you as an old Cotswold man likes to talk. Now, Lord, I'd like you to keep an eye on that allotment of mine. Don't thee let too much rain fall on it, especially at the bottom end. If it gets too wet down there, I can't do nothing with it. Time was when I could turn it up in lumps like osses, yuds, and let the weather get to work on it. But you know, Lord, as I ain't got the strength in me now. But thanks to you, I don't do so bad for an 80-year-old. Then there's that old apple tree in our cottage garden, planted as a pip by my father when he first got married. It bears a wonderful crop most years. And although it yunt any recognised sort, it has been a blessing to we. I do love my apple turnovers, all sweet and moist, just right for an old un with very nearly no teeth left. And I'll say as my old woman knows how to make apple turnovers, pies, puddings and tarts as well. You know, Lord, that there tree be a living sermon. Just think what you did, all from a blackish-brown pip 81 years ago. What a show of blossom we has, to say nothing of the fruit. And it'd be nice to sit in the shade of him when we got him in it, which yunt very often. Then it's a perch for the birds, very handy for the clothesline on a washing day, and we has our wireless aerial tied to him. Yes, Lord, you done a wonderful job with that there tree.
Well, I can tell you about an old pudding which has really gone out of fashion. It's more suitable really for the men folk who come in when they're really tired and been out probably on a wet day, and they call it lampler pudding. Now, this is made from buns and biscuits, and these are steeped in hot ale. And after they'd done the steeping, they used to add spirit and seasoning or sugar to the man's liking. And most of them liked a fair amount of spirit with their lampler pudding. Yerb pudding's a grand thing round here, and that's made in the springtime. We had Romans here, and of course the Romans are blamed for bringing nettles to England, never mind Cumberland. And as we had a Roman camp quite near to Cockermouth, we've got a good lot of nettles. Now, herb puddings are made from greens out of the garden, and nettles, black currant leaves, everything's all boiled up together, and with it is barley. It's all mashed, and then you take it and your blood's pure for the rest of the year. You also use the juice, if you like, to wash your hair, just to keep your hair in good condition. You'll probably have noticed along by most of the old country cottage gardens that they have an edging of boxwood. Now, at one time, this boxwood was grown for a great deal of purposes, one of which was to stop a man from going bald. His old woman had to collect boxwood, boil it, and rub his head with the juice, after he'd got to bed, of course, because he had to lay quiet when he'd got the juice on his head, and so the best place for it was bed. And if that didn't cure him from going bald, well, he got to rub with a raw onion. And then if your eyes bothered you, well, you gathered a few celandines and made an eye wash from celandines. And an old lady said to me, "Celandines aren't only good for your eyes," she said, "they're gay good for your corns."
During the last war, I used to travel up and down from Teignmouth to Plymouth by train in the mornings and evenings. And at that time, they had first introduced a tannoy system at Newton Abbot railway station to make the announcements of the train times. And on this particular morning, we arrived at Newton Abbot and we heard the announcer say, Newton Abbot, train now standing at number 4 platform going to Plymouth. Over the bridge to Torquay, hurry up and take your seats, the train's about going." Just recently, I had to travel down to catch the Torpoint ferry, and I left here in a rush to get there because I knew the time of the ferry to leave was about due. And I went rushing down, and the man on the gate was just closing it when I arrived, so he opened it again and waved me through. And I went down to the ferry, and as I drove on board, I said to the ferryman, "How about that for good timing?" And the ferryman said, "You'm lucky, we'm late."
I've been working in the pits about 8 years when I shifted to a little pit village called Fatfield. I was working at Harrogate Colliery at the time. I've been living in Gateshead for 6 years, then I moved to the village, a little pit village, and it was the morning of the big meeting, and seeing the band form up outside the miners' welfare in Fatfield. Then I used to get on the train, follow the band into Durham and watch the big parade down Silver Street. And this is where all the bands from the different lodges, miners' lodges in the county, used to parade down Silver Street, down onto the racecourse to listen to the traditional Durham Miners' Gala speeches. Now, there was all sorts of bands, local bands, Scots bands, and say the lads, the young miners and their wives, dancing up and down in front because it was a big beer day, the gala, as well as having this political significance. It was a big jollification day as well. In my time, anyway, you know, it developed from the stone political ground that it started off with, and then I used to go down onto the racecourse. The Hoppings were there, the fairs, the pubs were open all day. Go down onto the racecourse, and whichever speaker you happen to fancy listening to, you're going to make your way and listen to him. Listen to all the promises and rubbish that they used to spout out. A lot of it never ever happened. And then, about 5 o'clock at night, you'd see all the bands pack up and make their way back home. And the rest of the evening was just given over then to just jollification, just a normal gala day, shows and dancing. And that's about what it meant to me.
One morning near the market I was slowly passing by. 'Twas there I saw a seedy man with a red and bleary eye. He looked at me, I looked at him. He said his name was Bill, and asked us if I didn't know him, and what I stand a Jill. Says I, "Yeah, the best of me. If I've seen ye before, I cannot recollect the time." Says he, "We're near the door that leads to Christian Comfort." So henny stand a Jill. All then is just 3 happens, and I'll pray for you, I will. 3 happens that I haven't got, says I, with me the day, or else I'd let you head, says I, and tried to move away. He clutched us tightly by the arm, says he, "Come, stop, I beg, for I've only got a halfpenny, will you stand a t'other meg?" I chanced to have a halfpenny whiz. I handed it to him. Says he, "God bless ya bonny fess, ya like me Uncle Jim." I moved away, but late at night I passed the very door, and there, as drunk as man could be, was the one I'd seen afore. He didn't seem to know us again, for hadn't out his hand. Says he, "Come here, my canny man, what are you going to stand?" "I've only got a half Jill's price," he shouted us out again. but the everlasting happiness charms wi' me was fairly gien. Says I, me man, I pity you. But pity does nae good. You've showed your paltry swindle 'tis. Try walk, as sure you should. I like the man that checks his jill, and decency had's dear. But oh, the man deserves contempt that cadges for his beer.
I heard cuckoos smarnin'. I heard 'un go cuckoo, cuckoo. I were just thinking about getting out of bed when I heard 'un, so I says to Missus, can you hear cuckoo? Her never answered her were asleep. So I gives her a bit of a shake, careful like, and I says, Missus, can you hear cuckoo? She did open her eyes then and looked at I a bit anxiety like. What I say? I says, can you hear cuckoo? Hear cuckoo? No, I can't hear nar cuckoo. Well, thee bide quiet and listen. So we bid quiet, and then we hears un again. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Don't sound like cuckoo to me, Missus says. Well, I don't know no other bird as does say cuckoo, does thee? She says, oh, I don't know. I be going back to sleep. Waking I up to hear cuckoo. Thee get off up the milking house, thee's be late. So I pulls on me trousers and I puts on me boots. And I was just going on down past the boy's door when he hollers out, Feyther, did shear cuckoo? I says, ah. Well, you come on in here and you can see him. He be sitting in Timbertop up by Miss Ailey's cottage. I says, well, I knew he wasn't far away. So I goes in with boy and we looks through winder, and there he were, sitting up on Timbertop up by Miss Ailey's cottage. I looks at un, and I looks at un, and I says, that bain't nar cuckoo, boy, that be pigeon.
Now, I'd like to tell this story about a friend of mine who's retired, one of the old veterans. He doesn't knock about much, but the high spot of his year is the cup final. He never misses going to Wembley, and he goes down for the weekend. He makes a weekend of it. Everything booked up, everything of the best. 2 years ago he went, so on Saturday morning he had a nice stroll round. He strolled up Regent Street, along Oxford Street as far as the Marble Arch, and a nice stroll up the Edgware Road, and going up the Edgware Road he passed a pet shop, and there was a parrot in a cage in this pet shop, and just as he was passing this parrot said, I know thee. He thought, that's marvellous, a parrot in London talking lanky dialect. So he went in the shop, he said, I'll give you out the once for that bird, named the price. But the proprietor said, no, Polly's not for sale, I'm sorry. He says, but you're very lucky, because Polly's laid some eggs this week, and if you like, I'll sell you an egg. I can put it up in a box, surround it with cotton wool, it will keep it warm, and you can incubate the egg quite successfully when you get home. Now, last year he went again as usual, same old programme, down on the Friday. Saturday morning walked up Regent Street, along Oxford Street as far as the Marble Arch, and then strolled up the Edgware Road, and he was just passing the same pet shop. There was the same parrot in the same cage, and just as he was passing, the parrot said, I know thee. So he turned round, he says, aye, and I know thee too. Thy father were a duck.
I was in Wiltshire jail in 1930, and I got 7 days. Do you know what it was for? Not paying a fine, because I was out of work and had 4 kids, and couldn't afford to keep the kids at the time, never mind pay a fine to go to jail. 7 and 6 in them days was like £7, wasn't it? Anyway, the detective come to ask me, was he going to pay the fine? I says, yes, a £10 a week. He said, what the blazes you think we are, club collectors? Anyway, the next morning I went to Welton to work the fine up. I was in 2 days, and your mother came down, paid the fine, got me out. But that was only because the new Road Traffic Act came into force. and that was hanging on the back of a lorry with a bicycle getting a tow up a hill on a bike. And the bobby pulled the wagon up. You remember the old steamers with the trailers on the back? One of them it was, about 4 miles an hour, going up a hill. And the bobby had the cheek to say I was pinching a ride.
They used to say that the best road out of Manchester was a bottle of gin or whatever poison you happen to prefer. Maybe it's the gin that's gone off, because the best road out nowadays is the East Lancs, the one that runs the 30-odd miles from Manchester to Liverpool. And that's the only city that seems to have the character of everybody's hometown, and particularly the hometown of a Manchester man. The East Lancs is easily grained into any Manchester man's makeup. Whenever the planners have tried to make the city and Salford, the neighbour, the bastard place that looks a mess on a map but is a real separate thing when you get to know it, they've had to take into account that East Lancs road. It's there, and there's so much traffic on it, you can't rub it out. And you wouldn't want to when you reckon that it links up the 2 warmest places in the northwest. I've never been able to make up my mind about what it is that's common to Manchester and Liverpool. Maybe it is the commonness, the everydayness of life in both of the pair. Or again, maybe it's what relieves that everydayness, the sense of a past and a present that promises everything, only to be dashed day in, day out by the fret-working businessmen who seem to have got the upper hand in both cities. But even those businessmen, you see, haven't quite quelled the life in the rabbit warren that's mid-Manchester or the weasel run parallel to the Mersey that's known locally as the Liverpool Dock Road. So what I'm really saying, if it needs saying, is that the East Lancs Road has to be there for the sake of us all. That's Mancunians and Liverpudlians. Liverpool, if you're from Manchester, is the only other bit of passable home ground. And the Liverpool men I worked with have always felt the same about Manchester. None of us like drinking the gin.
My friend and I, they asked us to go over Queniborough because we do a bit of visiting like, and we went over to the Women's Fellowship, and we went over in the motor, and we got out at this here little chapel. It were a lovely little chapel, and they welcomed us in, and the entire got it lovely. And there were a woman there as lives nearby, and them there old houses, you know, next to the chapel, and 200 years old they are. And she sat there, and she didn't know where she were going to go. And there another of her neighbours has been there 50 year. I mean, you think when you're going to be thrown out of your house, when you've been there all your life, I think it's scandalous. People ain't got no feeling. Any road we thought we'd cheer her up, you say. So we gave her a good laugh. We were talking about being converted, you know, the gas man coming and putting the fires in, and now that ain't right, you say, 'cause that dries the air up. It ain't no good, and where you going to slush your tater parings and all your rubbish if you ain't got a coal fire? Now, you say, these there women at the Women's Fellowship, they don't half see the sense right. They'd made rock buns and sponge cakes, they're as light as a feather. Hey, and we had a little hymn, you know, and we had a prayer, and some on them was selling a few flowers to make a bit of money, and we did enjoy it. Hey, and we had a good sing. Now, you say, that's where the trouble is these days. The folks don't know how to sing. You say they were chapel, that's why. Oh, and we did enjoy it, and they didn't half raise the roof. It was lovely.
Yeah, well, talking about it, Tony, there's my cousin, right? Do you know Jimmy, don't you?
Yeah.
Now, he come down the other
The
week, and
nutter.
he is, I've never known a Cockney like him. I mean, he's going round saying, going out tonight and all this, you know, he goes round like that.
Yeah.
He, of course, he's got long hair now, you know, really long.
Has he?
Yeah.
You know that Kathy Tucker?
Yeah.
Well, I was, it's only last week. I was round her, you know, where I live.
Yeah.
And she goes to me, go up to my gaff and get me radio down. I goes, what's gaff? You know, I didn't really know what it meant then, but, you know, I've heard it all the time.
That's just the same as Janie, my cousin. She turns around and says, says to us, where's all my blokes coming around tonight and all this, you know, going out somewhere, have a cup of tea.
The
you
bloke's
know.
common, innit?
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of Cockney, you know what I mean? It's double Dutch and all this, really.
Yeah.
Compared to things like, when I was up the road the other day, my mate turned around and said, I had a cut on my face. He said, what's happened to your boat race? Must have fell down the Appleton Piers and all this, you know. It was rather funny.
Laugh, yeah.
It is a laugh. I quite
but
agree
it's all
there.
what they use. They always turn out of these new words, Cockney, didn't they? What's the new one?
You can have, say a geezer goes down the road and he says, they're like asking you to fight. I say, all right, brother, watch out. So give you a 1-2 spank, like they use. And then you got the, what's the beef pal and all this like, you know. You get all these sort of words. I mean, I was walking down the street the other day and a geezer said that to me. Yeah. How are you, pal, all right? And pal's a right Cockney name.
Yeah.
There must be Cockneys all over the country now, and people are wondering what they can't understand us, we can't understand them, and that's it.
Well, I was given away at 3 days old. I was a twin. My grandfather and grandmother brought me up. They had 7 men work for them, the carpenters and wheelwrights. I was always on my own, and my grandfather told me, always go out on your own and never let your left hand know what your right hand do. I could have been a carpenter. I might have had my grandfather's carpenter shops and that left to me. They were left to me. I'd had them. They still have been a Brooks carpenter and wheelwright at Bolton. That was there 250 years, and I might have been there now. But the only thing is, I just didn't like the idea of being shut in. If I go out in the morning, I get home when I like, and I have my dinner when I like. There's always some food in the pantry, and I know there's some there, and I look after myself. I never worry about looking at a watch, because a man who looked at a watch and got to leave off at a certain time and bun time and that, he have his ideas. But in a factory, I can't see whether they're any better off than I am.
My first taste of cider, now that's rather funny because I wasn't all that old. I was somewhere about, 8-year-old when I had my first lot of cider. And I can tell you what happened. We used to go up and we used to tell the farmer's wife, see, we'll pick up the eggs, Mum. So we used to pick up the eggs purposely to go into the cellar, see. We used to go into your cellar. Brother as well, and we used to have these little coffee bottles, fill them up, down that, and that was marvellous as far as was concerned.
But what did your mother say when you went home smelling of cider?
But we didn't let her know that, see. Oh, not on your Nelly. No. We used to go in the garden, and we used to pick off some parsley and chew it. You know, just terrible strong stuff like. We didn't like it, not like we did the cider, but anyway, that's what we done. Queen House. Well, everything was all right until you was going to bed. Of course, we always had to kiss Mother goodnight, mind. Didn't matter what happened, you had to kiss her goodnight, otherwise it was for it. And she used to say, you've been eating that parsley again, William. Of course, and we couldn't tell her. I thought, well, look, we'd have eating, see. So anyway, that went on for some time, and then after we got a bit, left school and all that, and got older, and Mother was dead against drinking, see, so we had to wait till we was, I expect I was 30, I expect, before we told her, for 30. And I said, Mother was on about this parsley, and I said, now look here, Mother, I said, why we used to eat this here parsley? I said, we used to go up and have a drink, I said, out in the cellar. I said, we had to eat that there, see? I said, so you wouldn't know we'd had it. Oh, you crafty bounder, because she never used to swear, she wasn't that type of person.
Well, I was born on Barton Hill. There was 12 of us. Well, I know times were very, very hard because my mother used to go work in between having her children down Tots the tailoring. And I remember I stayed home from school time and time again because I've had no shoes to wear. We had to wait and get some over the second-hand shop over the road. We didn't know what a cup of milk was, not when we were poorly. I used to stand behind my father's tea and wait for the top of his egg. Never knew what an egg was. When I left school, when I was 14, I went into service in a house at Redland. And it was 6 shillings a week. I used to have to clean the windows with newspaper, no dusters, and light the fires with paper. Well, I couldn't get the fires to burn with paper, so I used to buy a sack of sticks and carry them on the train at Lawrence Hill. And the workmen used to help me on with them and help me off with them in Redland. And I used to take these sticks and use them out my own money to light our fires with.
I well remember when I was a boy, that was at the Boer War. In Debenham they built a sort of an archway, you know, green leaves, etc. Well, the next day the street was lined with people and children, and motor car come over the hill, not many of them about that time of day, and pulled up under this arch, and who do you think that was? That was the great Lord Kitchener. A very big soldier, I was told. He'd got pierced nose and a moustache, you know, and a bairn straight up. His back was straight as a die. And he come that night to stay at Aspel Hall. Well, I think they was relatives. But anyhow, the next day, the Debenham volunteers and that mustered up at Aspel Hall, and people, and he inspected the volunteers. There he was, a finer body of men one never see before or after. And he walked up and down the lines, and there was a soldier walked behind him with a real drawn sword, and I wondered what that was for, but the boy told me that was in case somebody might try and do him in. Anyhow, all the parade was over, and that's a great deal for this part of the country, you know. Well, then come the moment for the railway. In the afternoon he boarded the train at Aspel and went off to Hawley, you see. And I don't suppose the railway had took such a wonderful personage before. And that was a very great day for all us round here.
I was in the same place, down this lane myself, and I got my greyhound with me, and I wanted a rabbit. I only used to go out and get a rabbit when I'm not for Salem or nothing. I just have a rabbit now and then. And I was down there, and this greyhound, I know there's a lot of rabbits over in this field, and my dog wouldn't go. And I got all on the edge, and I got his head in there, and I was pushing him, get him through. And he turned around and growled out and showed his teeth, and I myself, hello. But there was a keeper the other side of the edge, no wonder he wouldn't go through. And that was what he was telling me, there was a keeper there.
At that time, I had a black cocker spaniel. He was forever pouncing into the rushes and sedge for voles and mice, and usually he killed any caught. I saw him pounce, but took little notice until he came to heel and started to follow along behind me, and then it seemed obvious he had something to show to me, and I could see his mouth all puffed out. As I put down my hand, so he opened his mouth, and to my surprise, out flew a Jenny wren. Well, you know, you would have thought the little bird would have had all his wits scared out of him. But no, not he. He flew to a branch a few yards away, preened his feathers, and then whistled as though wanting to let the world know he was free. A glance down at the old dog showed him with his tail wagging like mad, and it was with a queer lightness of heart that I continued on my way.
Well, when the scarlet pimpernel blossom is closed, that's a sure sign of rain. We read, closed is the pink-eyed pimpernel, 'twill surely rain, I see with sorrow. Our jaunt must be put off tomorrow. And then, of course, there was rather funny things that used to be said about rain. Now, Tom Whittle, he was an old friend of mine, he used to say that the ploughboys years ago, they'd say to each other, perhaps in the stable, when it was raining, they'd be sheltering, you see, and one would say to the other, aye, more rain, more rest. And the farmer would overhear them. He'd say, what did you say, my boy? And the boy'd say, aye, more rain, more grass for the cow, sir. See, just to get out of it like that. And then George Hunting, you remember George Hunting, the sprout picking champion? Well, if it was raining out and we were working out in the fields, he'd say, aye, it's a few too many on one. Few too many spots on one person, you see, and go into the oval and get out of it. Few too many on one. And another saying that we used to hear quite often was, don't keep it off the ground. It'll do more good on the ground than on thy back. Get in the oval. See, that was another thing that used to be said about it. I was talking to a man the other night, and Will Spitz, he lives down the road, and he was on about these crows being at breaknecks. Well, they go round in circles, and then they come down like dive bombers, and that's a sure sign of rain. And he said to me, I thought it was rather an apt sort of a description, he said, that's when they start the cider making, he said, going round and round in circles.
Sweet lass of Richmond Hill, sweet lass of Richmond Hill, high crowns reside to call a mine, sweet lass of Richmond Hill.
This is Richmond, Yorkshire, where the lass of Richmond Hill was born. We have the curfew, which rings every morning at 8 o'clock, and the curfew at 8 o'clock at night. That is to get the apprentices out to work, and then they have to be indoors by 8 o'clock of the night time. And then, of course, we have the alberts, which are put up outside the mayor's house every Saturday for market day. And he rules the market. He has the right of the market as the mayor, his own prerogative. In those days, it was rough going, same as what it is today. And they used to take these albertiers and protect the mayor when he was on these processions and one thing and another. Another old thing is we are the only people in the kingdom which the town clerk, when we get a new town clerk, he must be sworn in by the Queen. And that's the only one that I know of in England.
Well, the horn and all noises of different descriptions, even the church bells, the origin of these were, in fact, to keep away evil spirits. And these was blown round the bride and bridegroom's house the night before they got married so that they'd be free from evil spirits. And this has continued up to about 20 years ago till it's become illegal, of course. But it is still done under cover of darkness, and the people still continue this practice in outlying places in the island.
Dulles has been used as a source of food in Ireland for as long as anyone can remember, and men have braved the winds and the tides since early times to gather this delicious edible seaweed. Jimmy explained that rock dulles was sweeter than tangled dulles, and he mixed them, and that was why there was always a great demand for his dulles, because of its wonderful flavour. In a couple of days' time, it was the Harvest Fair Day in Newton Ards, and Jimmy said that he needed to gather a lot of dulles, for the farmers loved to eat it at the fair. It gave them a good thirst for their porter. We packed as much dulles as we could into the bags, and before long there was a mountain of seaweed in the bottom of the boat. The tide started to rise and came sweeping across the rocks in small streams. Jimmy held the boat and ordered me into the stern. He let go our mooring rope and pushed the boat away from the rocks. The sun was sinking fast, and in its bright yellow light we made for the harbour. A fresh breeze sprang up from the shore, and Jimmy leaned a little more heavily on his oars. A flight of terns hovered close to us, and then moved away seaward with sharp cries. When we reached the pier it was almost dark, and we unloaded our cargo of dulles. Next morning Jimmy was up at the crack of dawn to spread the seaweed. All morning he sat on a pole watching the dulles dry. During that time he turned it occasionally to make sure it would be dried throughout, and when he was satisfied it was ready, he lifted it quickly in huge armfuls and stuffed it into Hessian sugar sacks, which he generally managed to get from the local shops for nothing. These were then loaded on the village carrier's lorry and taken away to be sold on Harvest Fair Day. Old Jimmy's long dead, and his boat was wrecked completely during the spring equinox gale. But the Dully men still leave the harbour for the Dulles rocks, and each stretch of rocks is still as jealously guarded as it was in Jimmy's time.
Well, one of the things that I have learned about being Irish is that invariably, when I go into, say, I go out to lunch or possibly out to dinner, some of my English friends immediately want to imitate the Irish accent, and I'm unhappy to say from personal experience that this is a most atrocious attempt. However, one has to smile and grin and bear it, you see. In fact, I remember on one occasion I was doing business in Fleet Street, and a very nice chap came up to me and he said, "The top of the morning to you, Aidan." And I sort of smiled rather wanly, and I said rather tersely to him, I have been 30 years in Ireland, and I have never heard in my life that expression. Unhappily, the poor boy was trying to be very pleasant, and he was most hurt by this observation, and later I had to come along and to mollify him. This is part of the whimsy which is attached, I think, to Ireland, and people like to be pleasant about it. They don't mean to be, English people, I should say, don't mean to be offensive. They just like to tease the Irish a little bit and use a bit of a brogue, but unhappily, only outside professional actors have I heard a very good Irish voice being done.
Edinburgh is a city of contrasts. We have some of the finest buildings, gardens and parks, and yet out of the normal tourist routes, some of the worst slums. The Royal Mile is a hodgepodge of old tenement buildings lovingly restored by the corporation, and across the other side of Princes Street we have the wide streets, Georgian squares and gardens of Britain's first new town, which is now over 200 years old. For 3 weeks of the year the city hosts the most varied arts festival in the world.
You should listen to these two for a minute. Cursing, slang and threatening each other as Glasgow Nyavs have done in Bobby's bar since dear knows when on the time-worn topic. Who's won the greater number of trophies, eh? Celtic. Admit it, don't be stupid. Rangers taught the world to play football, man. The thin one says he would sacrifice a chance to win the pools just for the pleasure of seeing the fat one hung from Ibrox stand with his own Rangers scarf. The fat one promises to pray that another blade of grass never grows in Celtic Park. They smash the old Irish Catholic and Orange Protestant arguments at each other's teeth with commendable vehemence. The ritual has been enacted 1,000,000 and more times, and this current joust seems just like all the others that have gone before, except that the wee protagonist on the left is called Fu Yen, and the fat one on the right, Mohammed.
Well, you know, since the start of this new Inverness London direct air service every day, it's really first class for a businessman like myself. I can leave Inverness early in the morning, be down London by 10 a.m, get a complete day's work in London, catch the plane in the evening, 6 o'clock, have a nice dinner on the way up and a few drams, and get back into Inverness by, say 9, 9:15 or so. Just time to run down to the pub and have a pint and a dram before getting home for the night.
Robert Burns, Scotland's national bard, was an Ayrshire man, and by reputation he was a great boy for the girls. One fine May morning he's walking down a village street in Mauchline in Ayrshire, and coming to meet him was a nice rosy-cheeked country lass, a milkmaid, and she was carrying the milk with the old-fashioned yoke over her shoulders and a milk pail in each hand. Burns said, "Good morning, miss." She said, "Good morning, sir." He passed, then stopped and called back and said, "I don't suppose, miss, you know who I am?" "No, sir," she said, "I'm afraid I don't." "Well," I said, "I'm Robert Burns the poet." "Are you?" said she. "Ah, well then, I suppose I'd better put down my pails."
During the First World War, my father was involved in part-time soldiering. He was by profession a schoolmaster, and in the evenings and weekends he commanded a local platoon of volunteers. As part of the duties of defence, they were detailed to defend the Anglesey end of the Britannia Tubular Bridge. The platoon consisted of loyal, honest and enthusiastic men, and were mostly small farmers or had some connections with farming. Many were the humorous incidents and stories that my father used to tell. However, there was one occasion when as a small boy I was privileged to spend the weekend at the army hutment with my father. He had asked for a volunteer to cook the Sunday dinner. Corporal John said that he could do some simple cooking, and he set about the task. Some hours later we sat to dinner, and my father was very apprehensive, for although the cooking stoves were out in the open air, the stench of burnt meat wafted strongly into the hutment. And indeed, alas, we had burnt beef and potatoes for our meal, followed by a rice pudding which was so stiff and overcooked that one could literally have used it for a cannonball. Corporal John had apparently used a whole 1 gallon standard issue enamel basin full of rice to prepare a pudding for 12 persons. And when the rice mixture swelled up in the cooking, it took 6 more like-sized enamel basins to contain it all. The platoon had enough rice pudding to last them the remainder of the week. Somehow I don't think that my father ever really enjoyed rice pudding from that day onwards.
I was born a Welsh ugly duckling, and God knows I'm still no swan. Now, thanks be to God, the chocolate box ideal of feminine charm is no longer valid. But for me, what matters still is that I was born the ugly, youngest afterthought in a family of beautiful sisters. Ugly, spoilt, impossible, and unspeakably sad. My formative years were shaped by envy. In a loving and warm home, I was secretly devoured by envy. I was wickedly jealous of my sisters' good looks, of the very fact that they'd been born before me, and had therefore been able to enjoy our darling mother for longer than I had. Envious of fair curly hair, of friendships, alliances. I had projecting teeth. My dead straight hair was cut inexpertly by my father in a donkey crop. I was so skinny that they called me Russian famine in our large stem family. But always, always my mother was comforting and said my eyes were my redeeming feature. I wasn't sure what that meant, but we'd been brought up in a close awareness of our Redeemer, and in that context it was surely splendid to have the word redeeming apply to oneself. But I was a child who picked at sores and never trusted. What exactly had our Redeemer done, I asked my naive Auntie Lucy. Saved us from hellfire, of course. That's what redeeming meant. Saving from eternal damnation. My blue eyes saved my looks then from eternal damnation. God help me.